They would point an image tag, for instance, at an HTML URL. And because that HTML URL is not an image tag, it would generate an on error, and based on that, they could determine whether sites or whether there was information to be had from the timing of the request.
Okay, so the first direct thing that we're going to discuss, so straight off our talk, is the importance or actually playing with timing as a communication channel itself. When you're doing any sort of app testing or any sort of pen testing, one of the first things that you're going to start looking around for is a solid channel between you and your target. If you're doing network testing, it's pretty obvious. If you plan to extend your influence on the application, it's a requirement. So we're going to take a look at the progression of command execution attacks, and some of it is pretty ancient and old school, but just where we think the stuff's relevant. Okay, so oftentimes in the past, we'd find that the application itself gave you some sort of channel. Okay, so when we're talking about channel, we're saying we want to execute something, we actually want to see our results, or we want to get our results off the system. And in the old cases, it was pretty obvious that you'd find, if this shows up half decently at all, okay, in really old cases, it was pretty easy. The application itself gave you a channel. Okay, so you won't find many of these anymore. But for something like this application executes a ping command. After that, we get to inject our own commands. Okay, and what you'll see down here is that the app itself starts giving us our data back. Okay, if you're doing app testing against something like this, you should probably give the customer their money back. But in something like this, it's pretty straightforward, and you've got your channel, it's all clean. Where you do find this still a lot these days, so you're not going to find many old school Perl scripts around that just allow you to add queries, but what you will find a fair bit, and I suspect my hyperlink's not going to work, what you will find quite a bit is cases where, if I can just pull it up, okay, you will find cases where friendly SQL queries allow you to get too much information. Okay, so if we just log into this, I'm not sure how that actually shows up on screen, you'll often find instances with SQL injection where it turns out some data is being returned to the attacker, in which case all of you should be thinking you can use union statements, you can use more complex SQL queries to try to get more information back from that. Okay, so if we take this, you should be able to throw in something. Can you guys see my typing at all? Okay, can you see that I can't spell? Okay, name from sysobjects. Okay, so we should be able to throw in more complex SQL, and again, it's pretty straightforward. The application's going to give us a channel back, and we can start doing coolness. Okay, so this is slightly more common these days than a straight bird's eye style CGI, but you will find it in, that's my browser walking, but you will find it in a fair number of applications where SQL is being used to return something to the analyst/user. Okay, sometimes the firewalling on the system is so poor that the whole thing goes out of the window. So if any of you on any of our training courses, typically you'd use this application to send yourself back an Xterm or send yourself back a netcat. Okay, and in that point, in that case, you don't actually need to worry about a channel. The whole system is there for the rapage. Okay, so what we're going to start looking at now is when applications like that start getting a little bit tighter. Okay, and we came across this application or a version of this application a little while back where as part of the application they actually had a search portal. Okay, and the search portal pretty much used a snippet of code that looked something like this. Anyone want to take a quick guess at what that snippet of code is doing horribly wrong? Or what it's vulnerable to? Okay, if they don't sanitize your user input, they're actually vulnerable to injection through regular expressions. Okay, so because of regular expressions eval command, you're actually going to be able to inject a regular expression in there. Okay, so for example, if you threw in something like that, well, let's actually see the search working, just so I know that Marco's image does. Okay, you should be able to put in a search term. It should come back and decide actually that's in its database or not, based on its regular expression. Okay, but once you figure that they are injectable, you should be able to do something like that. Submit your query. Now, uname possibly did execute or possibly didn't execute, but sadly, we have no way of knowing and no way of confirming that. Okay, on the site in question, actually, their network was set up so that we couldn't get any return packets from this application. Okay, because when you're faced with a situation like that, normally you start saying, let's connect back, let's ping back, let's telnet back so that we know that we're executing. Okay, in this case, we actually found that the application was fairly tight, or the server was relatively well hardened, sitting behind a relatively well-configured network. So no packets were coming back to us, and actually it turned out we didn't have the ability to write to the file system either. Okay, what we did find though, I made this bigger so that you guys could see it. I suspect I might have overdone it a little. Okay, so what we're going to go with here is taking in just a sleep command. Okay, so if we take sleep into that search, instead of just running a uname, and we tell it to run a sleep instead, what you're not seeing, because it's clearly off the browser, is that this thing's now taking a few more seconds before actually returning to us. Okay, so what it's giving us here is clear confirmation that it is doing its sleep. Okay, you should see that it's sleeping for 10 seconds. And you start to see that timing starting to present itself as a reasonable channel. Okay, so if we go back and start to see how much we can fiddle with, we actually figure that within our regular expression, we can call another instance of Perl again. Okay, so instead of just telling it to sleep, within the regular expression, we're telling it to call Perl and tell Perl to call sleep. Okay, and the reason we're doing this is just because we want more control over the results of our sleep or over the results of our command. Okay, and you see that that ends up being successful. And essentially, this puts you in a position to start doing coolness. So instead of just telling it to sleep, the command under it actually says, run the command uname, then grab the first character of your output and grab the ordinal value of that character and then sleep that amount of time. Okay, and so we can string this along and then say grab the second character, sleep its ordinal, grab the third character, sleep its ordinal. Okay, and so what we ended up with at that point was a script called timing.py. We're not very creative when it comes to naming stuff. Okay, and so if we run a uname command like we did on that box, you should see that you get the ordinal for S, which is 83. It slept 83 seconds, comes back with S, sleeps 117 seconds, comes back with U. Eventually, just by timing the sleeps, we can pull out the full results of whatever command we inject. Can anyone see one of the big issues with that? Okay, absolutely. Our analysts kept falling asleep. So the result of that uname, at the best of times, would take about 8 minutes, okay, to get you Sonos. And what's worse than that is it had very little margin for error. Okay, so if we go back there, if it expected 83 seconds for an S, a little bit of jitter on the line could have taken you anywhere. Okay, and it's relatively easy when you're trying to get Sonos because you can fill in the blanks, but if you're trying to download binary files, it's going to start to suck. Okay, and this was largely just because we were a little bit stupid about it, because with a little more thinking, you could say using the ordinal is really stupid. If we're already in Perl and we've already got our results, let's instead break the stuff up into a binary string, and then for binary we can sleep 0 or sleep 1 or some multiple of it to get what we want. Okay, which took us to our second version, which again was cunningly named Another Time. Okay, which aiming at the same thing. That looked wrong. Okay, which one time. Sorry, like I said, our names are not very inventive. Okay, so it took us to a script called one time, which basically said, give us the command you want to run, and then tell us an arbitrary time. And what the 2 seconds is, or the 2 second here says is, if you get a 1, sleep for 2 seconds. If you get a 0, sleep for 0 seconds, so that we can tell the difference between both of these bits. And so this is using the same search box that we just saw. This time it's running on our machine, so it's actually the results on a Linux box, but your results should be a lot more usable time-wise. In fact, like I said, we are a small security company from South Africa, and with our bandwidth, we barely notice the difference. This is about what our Office connects at anyway. Okay, so using this method, we're able to pull data off of CGI or some application that's giving us this sort of behavior. And I'll kill this now gracefully before it actually embarrasses me in front of everyone. Okay, no. So one of the good things about this is you've got a high margin for error. So if we decided there was latency on the line, we could tell it for every bit that's a 1, sleep 10 seconds and sleep 0 seconds. And anything between 0 and 9, it's going to decide is a 0. And anything 10 over, it's going to decide is a 1. So it's pretty reliable. That's its null bytes, which I was hoping to stop talking before. But, okay, so if we go back now to SQL injection attacks, or go to a classic SQL injection attack, and I'm going to bounce around a whole bit, what we find is, again, SQL injection attacks way early, so in 2001, gave us a channel in itself. Okay, so if you wanted to do stuff using a SQL injection attack, one of the things that you could relatively easily do was use the application itself as some way of getting what you wanted. Okay, so if you had an app that was vulnerable to pretty 101 SQL injection, you are in the position to say exec master xp command shell. Sorry, my exec master dot xp underscore command shell. Okay, and you were relatively easily able to say something like old school is cool. Greater than C inet pub, if you could spell root